smonta tutto, il film non si fa più. Quei giorni qua non ci deve essere più niente, bisogna cominciare subito. Coraggio, al lavoro, buttate giù. Dico bene, dottore?
Sì, grazie. Arrivederci, ragazzi. Ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.
Ciao, marinai.
Welcome to Cinema Italia, a podcast dedicated to the world of Italian cinema. Presented by me, John Bleasdale. And welcome to Cinema Italia. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to welcome Lino Meireles, who is a Brazilian director who I think we definitely first crossed paths in Cannes on the Croisette. Isn't that right? How many years ago?
Oof, I've gone to Cannes since 2009. That's sort of in another life as a critic, right? We go to Cannes as critics and review films. But yeah, I've been going pretty steadily since 2009, except for the pandemic. And we met in one of those lines. People think Cannes is all glamour for press. Not for press, though. You know, we mostly used to stand in line.
It's 90% queuing, basically.
Yeah, and then you start chatting up people around you, and that's how we met. And the fascinating thing, the thing we always stop each other in the halls and just ask quick impressions, because our impressions of movies are so different.
Absolutely.
Me and John's, right? So that's the fun part. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you like that. Oh no. What are you talking about?
It's so rare that we agree on something. That's the only time we stop. It's sort of like, what, you like that? And I like that too?
Yeah.
Something must be wrong.
Yeah. So, it's always been a fantastic match.
Actually, I think since they started doing things like online ticketing and you don't queue quite so much, it sort of takes away a little bit of that opportunity to just sort of meet people in context, which is totally random.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when we talk about movies, right, everyone, even people who are shy, like I'm a very shy person, but talking about movies is when I'll talk to strangers all the time.
Yeah. And you get into you overhear someone else's conversation and you turn and say, no, I don't know, or yes, exactly. Or, that's great. By the way, what have you been working on recently, Lino?
Oh, right now, this year, I'm working on film scripts, right? Mostly short films. My career, I've directed a documentary about Brazilian cinema, a feature that played right after and during the pandemic. And after that, I got so into Brazilian film that I worked as a producer on a restoration of a Glauber Rocha film, A Black God, White Devil, which is an awful title in English. It's actually called Deus e o Diabo na Terra do Sol. It means God and the Devil in the Land of the Sun. And it's kind of Brazil's Citizen. It's Brazil's Citizen Kane. It's Brazil's Roma, Open City. It's Brazil's Abu de Souffle. And so it was great. I mean, it played in Cannes in 64, and then we were able to present it in the Cannes Classic Selection in 22. So I've been, selling distribution for the film around the world since 22, and now I'm mostly focusing on screenwriting. So I have something new to shoot. I want to shoot fiction. Probably another short film before I go to a feature, but hopefully that'll work out this year.
I'm excited to see what you have to offer in coming up next. So today we're going to be talking about Brutti, Sporchi, Cattivi. Is that the correct title? Have I got it in the correct order?
Oh, don't ask me.
What's it called in Brazilian?
It's called Ugly, Dirty, and Mean.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Brutti, Sporchi, Cattivi. I think in English it might have been translated as Down and Dirty.
Yeah, which is a good title. All right.
Yeah, that exists as a phrase in English. So, usually on this podcast, I'm sort of talking about a film I've already seen a few times. So it's kind of interesting to be talking about one that I have very little knowledge of. But it's 1976. It was directed by Ettore Scola. And it stars Nino Manfredi, celebrated Italian actor who probably was most famous in Italy for his portrayal of Geppetto in the Rai production of Pinocchio. Why did you choose this film?
Yeah, well, as you know, I suggested this film. I listened to the podcast, Cinema Italia, and I love most of the films that you've been talking about, but plenty of smarter people have something to say about Antonioni than I think I just listened to the L'Avventura episode. And I love classic Italian cinema, but it's kind of not a surprise to like classic Italian cinema. And so when someone mentions Italian cinema in general, I like to think about the not really the forgotten, but the unmentioned, right? Because there's such titans in Italian cinema. And in fact, the Brazilian movement of Cinema Novo, which was the one that put Brazil on the world map, is a direct descendant from Italian neorealism. There weren't film schools in Brazil in the 20th century, in the first half of the 20th century. So a lot of Brazilian directors built connections in Italy. When the neorealist films came to Brazil, that's when the director said, "Dude, this is what we need to do. You know, this social consciousness, this bare bones production look. You know, real life. We need to bring real life to the screen." And so there's always been an Italian thematic. I think the first films in Cinema Novo are a little too dependent on Italian realism to be called something different. But then when Glauber Rocha, which is the director whose film I restored, comes along, you know, he elevates it to a mythic proportion. And then that's when Brazilian cinema takes off internationally. So there's this mesh between Brazil and Italy. Although Brazil had not been through a world war, it has wild inequity, you know, social inequity and social gaps and wealth gaps. Brazil is a huge thematic battleground for inequality. And I wanted to talk about this film because this is really funny. I've never talked to anyone about this film. I don't know anyone. Obviously, I don't run around asking people if they've seen this film, but it's just never come up in conversation. And so I'm actually pretty excited. We didn't mention anything about our impressions of the film before we started recording. And I want to get to that. I want to ask you, just like point blank, what you thought of the film. But my connection to it came from, you know, over 20 years ago. It was probably the first time I saw it on DVD here in Brazil. Came from I remember there was like a publication, film magazine supplement that came out with films in world cinema that you had to watch. And I sort of I've seen most of the classics by then, by my early 20s. And I started chasing these rather unknown, at least by me, films. And it was the first film like this I'd ever seen. It blew my mind. I didn't know what to think of the movie. And in my early 20s, you know, in the beginning of this century, I thought it was hilarious, which rings differently now because I think it's more disturbing the more times I watched it. And it's obviously just a disturbing film, but it's also very funny for those people who are inclined to some very, very grotesque humor. And yeah, and then what's funny is that this the supplement had another film by Ettore. It's like We That Loved Each Other So Much. And so I went rushing to find this film. And it was just, I thought it was so boring, so run-of-the-mill, political sentimentalism, you know, about three friends who grow up together. And I've never seen another film of his. And I was completely bored. I had seen this film, Brutti, Sporchi, Cattivi, which was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And then I got a historical political drama that was, you know, everything someone in Brazil or someone in Italy had ever seen. I was so disappointed in it. I haven't really watched any other films from it. So what did you, I mean, I want to take a second. I'm sorry, I should have put this up. I don't know if you'll edit it. I want to go in the IMDb. I don't know if you want to talk about just give a quick highlight of what the movie is about.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a story of a family who live on the outskirts of Rome, but sort of on the outskirts, but within sight of St. Peter's Cathedral, which you can see in the background. And they are a multi-generational family. The grandfather and his wife live with his mother and his children and the grandchildren, and they all live in this sort of community of incredibly impoverished people in this shack, like shanty town. And he's lost an eye in some kind of accident at work, and he basically has a fortune in cash that he's obsessed by, that he keeps hiding in different places in the shanty town, in the shack. And that's kind of the story. Oh yeah, later on he gets he has a relationship with a prostitute, a sex worker, which upsets his family and lead them to want to murder him and that sort of is in some ways is kind of the third act, but that story doesn't really take off until quite late on. I mean, I think most of the film, like certainly the first half, maybe the first two-thirds even, is just establishing the family as this bunch of characters. And as you say, the grotesquerie of their characterization, of their living conditions, of the poverty, of everything. And it's done in this very this sort of Italian tradition, which does exist in the cinema, but I totally agree with you. Oh my God, that's a bad start. I totally agree with you, Lino, in that it's not necessarily the tradition that you see from Fellini and Michelangelo Antonioni and those more revered directors. Maybe Fellini a little bit later on with Satyricon and things like that. But you do see in people like Leni Wertmuller and the genre cinema, which is this sort of grotesque, extreme, political perhaps, but really amoral or immoral. And so political, I'd be very, it's so funny that you mentioned as well. The English title is We Were Once Loved, I think, or something. C'eravamo tanti amati is the Italian title for anybody who listens to this and wants to track it down with my awful pronunciation, which, as you say, is a kind of is much more revered and much more sort of held up as probably Scola's most famous film. But as you say, is a much more conventional film than this is. This is very much, I mean, when I was watching it for the very first time this weekend, I was just thinking, this is shameless. This is shameless as in the emotion and as in the TV show. It's both. It's about looking at poverty, but not looking at it in the usual frame of the noble poor or with some sort of political program in mind. This is about, these people are ridiculous and grotesque and ugly and horrific and funny and human, and there's a whole an unsentimental, and it was very, very funny.
It's very Hobbesian, right? It's very animalistic because everyone wants to steal this money from the patriarch, and who isn't even the oldest person who lives in the house, right? It's like there's his mother, a grandmother to all the children, but it's more than 10 people living in a one-room shack. And it's really hard to describe. I mean, we can sit here and talk about it, but the person who's listening to the podcast, he or she won't really realize what the movie is like until they see it. And almost as a joke, I want to read some of the keywords in the IMDb file of the movie, which has, let's see here. These are some plot keywords: incest, sexual promiscuity, brother-in-law and sister-in-law sex, nude model, nude photograph, male prostitute, failed murder attempt, baptism, cantankerous old woman, domestic violence, misery, promiscuity. I mean, there's over 60 of them, but in the end, something that I think is really funny is it has a technical to it. It has 360-degree pan. One of the keywords in the film. I thought that was so hilarious because, I mean, you're obviously watching a technical filmmaker. And Ettore, I mean, this is a Academy Award-winning director. I haven't seen the film that won. It comes later on in his career. This film, Brutti, Sporchi, is a Best Director win at Cannes. There's a lot of historical. This wasn't his thing, right? He's a very varied filmmaker in Italy, and this film is kind of like something out of left field. It looks like something out of left field for him, but again, it has the themes present in a lot of Italian films, which is this examination of societal rot, right? It's a contrast between what a family is supposed to be and what a family could actually be in the worst way possible. And there's a very funny shot in the beginning where above the bed, because the patriarch, Nino's character, he sleeps on the highest bed. He sleeps on the bed with his wife and whoever, walks into the bed in the middle of the night. And there's a little embroidery. I don't know if it's embroidery. I don't know if it's a little poster thing, but it says amore e fidelità, right? As like the themes of the house. And there's like two little deer running around it. So it's a cozy little thing. And the film begins with everybody sleeping. And so there's this 360-degree pan around the house to show us everyone who's inhabiting in all sort of like spatial arrangement. people on top of each other. 8 people are sleeping, 2 people are having sex. And it's just, yeah, it's kind of animal. And it starts with these sounds, which are snoring, but they also sound like animals snoring, not humans snoring. I don't know if you picked up on that. And it's just so mean. And it's one of the things about the film. The most important thing from this film is that it's unredemptive, right?
Right.
There is no redemptive arc. There is no nobility in these people. They're awful human beings. And I think that'll take us to, the biggest thing in the film, which is actually, I do think it's a film about a political film. I do think it's a film about capitalism, and I think it might be a film about even the Roman Empire.
Well, I definitely see there being sort of big things about human nature in there, and a sort of view of sort of, as you say, I love that idea you brought up about there being no redemption, because if this was shameless, there would be deep down at heart, and I'm thinking, by the way, there's a UK British television version of Shameless and there's an American television version of Shameless, and they are slightly different. The American is, as you could probably imagine, a little bit more on the redemptive arc than the British one. But you would have, in the end, family's what matters in the end, and that is really absent. There's no sense of you've scraped off a layer and you find the good heart underneath. That just, there's no evidence of that at all.
Well, I mean, they do end up all together under the same roof, but at the end of the film again. So I guess there might be a little hope for family in the end.
Yeah, true, but I mean, okay, true, but it's minimal. Let's put it that way. Put it this way: there's no sentiment attached to that. There's no, if there's anything, it's a sort of raw freedom that you can try to murder each other and nobody will intervene, and you will somehow, the level will just adjust itself accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are a couple of scenes, people walk into the frame with their hands in each other's throats, and the father, is slapping the mother around and trying to suffocate her, and then one of the kids is like drawing on a table, and without looking, he just picks up a knife and hands it to his mom so she can get out of the situation. And the mom's about to
That
stab
was
the dad.
so funny. And it's just so, I mean, it's so ludicrous and funny that the kids are so used to them fighting oh, mum will need a knife now to get dad off her. And then she gets her arm cut quite badly by the father, who's taken the knife off her and uses it against her. It's so, I mean, I hate this idea of political correctness and all this sort of stuff because it's such a narrow way of talking about things. But this doesn't, you'll find yourself laughing at stuff you should not be laughing at.
Well, I think that the film has a defensive layer. It is so out there. It is so unabashedly unsentimental that, I mean, you get its vibe. It's a vibe, right? So it has this layer of defense. Well, it's so unabashed that if you complain about it, I mean, don't you realize that everything is just so heightened? And people making softer movies try to get away with that when certain aspects of their movie, they're called out for the movie being un-PC, or for certain characters' actions to be reprehensible. And, contemporary directors are called out on that all the time. But they're not making movies that are unabashedly heightened like this one. So, I mean, they're called out in this context of something being reality. And this film, I mean, I'm sure it picks various realities, but it's so heightened that becomes a protective layer in itself.
It's like accusing Punch and Judy of being, which this reminded me of Punch and Judy, the British sort of puppet show, which is based on Puccinello, an Italian puppet show, and it's all about wives being beaten by and crocodiles and various sort of violent things. It's the sort of terrifying thing that you show children. So, as you say, if it's this heightened reality, you can say, well, you're not supposed to take it seriously. It's not supposed to be connected to real world domestic. Like, for instance, you just saying that IMDb word domestic violence, it's tagged as domestic violence. Yeah. But also, No, it is domestic violence, literally, but it's also doesn't exist in that kind of world in which that's a way of looking at it.
Yeah, and well, we're talking about NPC, and it's you know, Italy is a very macho country, and I live in a very macho country. I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s. To think of our media back then as so on PC, I mean, there's just so much content. And I think when you're talking about Italian cinema in general, you need to examine these movies as well, right? A lot of Italian comedies, and then because of Brutti Sporchi, I watched a lot of Italian comedies, especially Mario Monicelli, who I'm also has one of my favorite all-time comedies, but they're so on PC, and the Monicelli movies don't get away. I don't think they get away, spiritually with as much as this film, because again, they aren't as heightened as this, right? I mean, this is almost another reality. So I think that this film is also interesting to watch in relation to NPC, like macho comedies in Italy, who I think are actually more offensive because they're more down to earth, if you will. And this attachment, because what we have, if we're going to examine Italian cinema history, this film comes around in the 70s, and I've been trying, you're trying to figure out what is this film? How does it come in? And I guess the I don't know if this film is a masterpiece. It has a lot of third act problems and it slogs down a little, but it might be an anti-neorealist masterpiece. It might be the anti-neorealist masterpiece. I mean, I've never had the courage to watch Rossellini's Salo, right? 120 Days of
Pasolini.
Sodom. Yeah, I don't know if I should. I just never had the desire. Like that might be another very strong anti-neorealist masterpiece. But there comes a time when the children of the elders eat their elders, and this film almost quite literally, right, does this. Is this point in Italian history, and it was taken very seriously. I mean, won Best Director at Cannes, so people it got into Cannes and won Best Director. So people will surely saw the artistic value in this film and what it had to say. But I think as a historical moment in Italian cinema, I think that might be it. I think people who really love neorealist Italian films should watch this as the anti-vision of that whole aesthetic of not really aesthetic, but thematic elements in this film. It's a film populated by people in the lowest caste of society. In Brazil, it takes place in a slum, so in Brazil we call it a favela movie. Brazil had a whole range of favela movies after the success of City of God, And when you have City of God in 2003, and then in 2008, you're seeing versions of Romeo and Juliet in the favela, it's become commodified, right? But this one from the 70s is also a favela movie. But it's not a crime film. It's not a romantic film. It's not a film about social struggle. It's not a film about making us empathize with the lives that these people are living, or even to pity them. It's too brutal for us to pity them. It's for us to not want to see them, not even want to touch them, not even want to. I mean, even the title, right, is supposed to throw you off from the movie. Although it's very specific.
They're mean. It's in the. It's not like they're dirty and ugly, but they're good. They're good people down. No, they're mean. They're wicked. They're not nice people.
I mean, can you imagine sitting down with someone who loves, white savior films or like civil rights films in the US that have white characters as the main characters? Can you imagine sitting someone who thinks those films are the best in the year and watching this film with them?
Absolutely. Or even Ken Loach movies, or even sort of movies which take a very serious, slightly holy version of the working class and sort of, yes, the working class have these disadvantages, but there's always this, Daniel Blake character who is, broken by the system, but is a decent guy, the old oak, and all this sort of stuff. And this is like, this is the anti-Ken Loach. This is much more. I mean, Mike Leigh does something much more like this in his films, where he turns more middle class than working class characters, but he turns them into caricatures of a sort to make them very big characters. And his argument is, I've met these people. My caricatures are closer to the characters I've met than, Ken Loach's. I mean, I'm putting words into his mouth now. He doesn't actually say that, but that's kind of what I get from it. But I think you're absolutely right. It works against that sort of idea of let's go to the third world or part of our own country that looks like the third world, only with a sort of an agenda.
Well, I mean, I do think that the film has an agenda that's sharper. It's clearly a critique of capitalism, right? I mean,
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Let's get into that. What's right? I see what you mean. Yes, the compensation, the lire that
yeah.
he's been given.
I mean, this guy is he's retired from invalidity, is what you'd call it here. You know, like he had a work accident, he can't work anymore. He's been blinded in one eye. He got 1 million lire, which I think is the hardest thing for me to know in this film is if that's a significant amount of money, right?
That's a good point.
Mostly because of exchange rates. I mean, here in Brazil in the 80s, we had hyperinflation. So like $1 million here was nothing in the 90s because of hyperinflation. It's just a number, right? When you compare it to other countries. So I don't know if you have some perspective more than I.
Well, 800,000 lira in the 1970s, I think would be a large amount of money, but I don't think it'd be like anywhere near, it'd be a significant amount of money, but not like you can retire and don't have to work anymore.
Yeah,
which is kind of what he's doing. He's not spending it much. He's keeping it.
Yeah, I mean that's the funny thing. He's not spending this money. He's just hoarding it in his pant leg. And he sleeps with a shotgun so that if people will try to get the money while he's sleeping, he'll shoot. He shoots someone inside the house during the film, which is it's just so unabashed. And then, when he leaves the house, he hides the money somewhere. And as soon as he's out the door, everyone, I mean, there's like 10 people crawling all over the house looking for his money to steal it. I mean, these people want to kill each other. They don't mind. They don't want to kill each other, but they wouldn't mind if everyone fell dead around them. And there's a sequence, right, in the middle where he has this capitalist dream where his family is inhabiting this warehouse full of mattresses, sleeping on a good mattress, watching TV. The wife's in the kitchen with like the biggest, the newest, I guess, vacuum cleaner and washing machine. And one of the sons has his restaurant. So there's this 5-minute interlude in the middle where obviously all of their dreams are capitalist dreams, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this focus on the money is I think the most strident thing the film has to say is that this money hunger has destroyed the familial bond that these people have. They're only together to try and get his money or try and get each other money. There's like one of my favorite little jokes is there's this lunch at the end, right, with the family. It's almost like a Last Supper where everyone's there and he's about to get poisoned by his family, which is incidental. And one of the grandkids, I guess, goes up to him and before the meal wants to sing a song, and he sings a song. This little kid singing a song, and he gets emotional. Everyone like stops talking to hear the little kid singing the song. And as soon as he's done, he's standing right next to his grandfather. And as soon as the kid's done, he just sticks his hand out as if to receive some sort of payment or some sort of
his pocket money,
alms, right. For his, pocket money, like a tip. So, he didn't do it for his grand. He's just doing it for the tip. That's what kind of destroys the family. And then at some point in the film, a plot needs to kick in. And what gets it kicked in is that he has this really odd and sweet, I forget who made the score. Did you write that down?
Oh, yeah.
But there's like a really sweet score. He has another interlude with a prostitute who's straight out of Fellini. He has this like romantically shot encounter with a big bosomed, large lady prostitute where they lie down under one of those big like street signs. What do you call those? I forgot what you call those.
A big advertising hoard.
Yeah, and there's a romantic song, not unironic. It's unironically shot as a romantic encounter, and then he falls in love with this girl. He brings her to bed, and he starts spending his money on her. Right, he buys her a coat and stuff like that. That's where the family decides to kill him. That's when the plot kicks in, and then that's when everything else happens in the film. So, there's this money jealousy of the money that they think is theirs being spent on someone from outside the house. Every conflict, every little thing is about the money in this movie, which is also kind of a joke because it's not that much money, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think the thing you said was really interesting is that there are these moments which are kind of are not grotesquely funny and not comic. I mean, the film is as a whole it generically it slips between lots of different things. So, for instance, the filming of the 360 degree at the beginning, and then there's another 360 degree shot where they're all fighting essentially, and it's complete chaos after they've woken up, which is even more impressive because it's got so many other moving elements. And then you go out and you have this portrait of the shanty town in the morning with everybody waking up, and the little girl taking is in charge of the children and he's picking up each of the children. And it's kind of beautifully shot with the cityscape in the background, and it's really extravagantly done, and it really looks amazing. And you've got this poverty in the foreground and this magnificent waking city of Rome in the background. And then she's locking them all in a cage, which is essentially the creche that they use. And even then, that's not just done for comedy, because you get these wonderful lingering shots of these children just playing in this cage. And sort of one of them's headbutting a mutilated doll, and the other one sort of fiddling with a piece of rock. But they're filmed almost like it's a documentary, and they're filming this moment of childish innocence in the midst of this craziness. So it's really difficult to, what am I supposed to be feeling here? This is a horrible, grotesque sort of situation, but at the same time, it's kind of beautifully done, and it's put, it's so well. There's obviously an intelligence here, a filmmaking skill here, which is sophisticated and developed in direct contrast to the sort of tone of the rest of the movie.
It becomes kind of a slog by the end. Like some of the
Mhm.
sequences take so long to happen, and sort of like the score starts to interfere, right, with the
Mm.
editing and with this repetitive, I mean, the lunch just takes so long, and they're all there, waiting for him to poison it. He's gonna give a little spaghetti to the kid, and the mom's like, no, don't, because it has a poison. And then he goes off on a bike, right, and he goes to a margin and throws up the food and the poison, I guess,
He
essentially.
uses the bicycle pump to sort of pump salt water into his mouth down into his stomach in order to bring up the poison and the food. Yeah, I can't think of a more anti-Italian, you're talking about anti-neorealism, but even an anti-Bel Paese image than a man trying to vomit up as much Italian food as he possibly can. In the
Yeah, and what are we supposed to
detritus.
think there? Are we supposed to want him to die or not? I mean, I didn't have any idea myself. I mean, what would you want to happen?
You're kind of
Yeah.
indifferent. It's sort of like, yeah, I suppose you want him to survive just as the protagonist, so the story goes on. It's not like it's not a film that you feel anything.
Well, the only time this film has ever come up in conversation for me is in when you're talking about final shots. And this is like, and for me,
Oh
this is
yeah,
like an hour
yeah.
50-minute film where, yeah, you're not feeling anything. You're just laughing. I mean, you're too shocked to even know how to feel, but you're laughing, and then it wallops more than 2 hours of feeling in that final shot. I think it's one of the most incredible final shot. It's almost meaningless. I mean, it presents something that people know around the world is a huge problem, huge crisis, but it presents it rather matter of factly. And I'm not sure how it. I've never seen it without having seen the film before it, so it's impossible for me to remove that final sequence, that final shot from everything I've seen before. I mean, talk about everything just flowing into you in a final shot. I don't know if you want to reveal it now, later, or ever, but yeah, I think that's just the icing on the cake. It's for you to
Mm.
not feel anything for 2 hours and then just become completely wrecked by a final shot. It wrecks me every time. I mean, I don't. It's one of my favorite final shots in film history. Not as a technical feat, but as a thematic happening. I mean, the film really comes to a close and ends perfectly.
I totally agree with you. I think that's it is and I do want to save it for people who are listening to this who hopefully will go off and watch it, because I and I suppose it is hand in hand what I'm talking about in terms of where the tone is with the film, that we
Mm-hmm.
have seen something, mostly linked to children, mostly linked to not necessarily the child giving the knife or the child singing the song, but it's that romantic irony of the child sings the song and you're moved, and then he puts his hand out for the money, and you're like, oh, so did that song mean nothing, or does it undercut it, or does a song still remain? Is the little boy at the kitchen table going through his comics still innocent, even though he hands his mother a knife? Or is that part of his innocence, or does that ruin his innocence?
Exactly.
I don't think those things are necessarily decided or decidable. One other thing that I would argue in a sort of which I think that the film does extremely cleverly, is that you think that this is all sort of geographically located, and this is these particular people because they're particularly horrible. They've all got, the women have all got, grotesque mustaches and facial hair, and it goes out.
Yeah. So, oh my God.
It goes out of its way to do that sort of stuff, and then you get out of the favela or out of the slum, and you visit the policeman's office or you visit the post office or something, and you see that the world generally is like this. I mean, I think maybe the woman in the post office is like a bit more sympathetic, but certainly in the police station, this is just an extension of the slum. These people are no different in a way. There isn't that decisive break between respectability and unrespectability.
Well, that's the expert fine line that this film walks, right? It's everything we talked about, the anti-romantic view about poverty, but it also doesn't tell us that this is all their own fault. And if only these people would lead respectable lives, they would live respectably. They are in this system, right? This rot is everywhere. It's because, I mean, a lot of the films you might accuse the director also of having a bias against each other, or having, what do you call it, prejudice. I mean, films like these could be called a film done with smarmy prejudice about these. Look at these people. Look at how they live. But I don't know how to explain that the film doesn't do that. I mean, this film, it sets up the rot everywhere, right? And and as far as it being local, also it's a family film. It's a family film, a film about a family, and so everyone will recognize. I mean, obviously they're so exaggerated, but everyone will recognize the inner tensions. Those moment of tensions between members of an extended family. So I think that'll translate everywhere. It'll translate very well. The humor maybe not, but the pettiness, the petty arguments, right? It's a film about pettiness, and a lot of the best mafia movies have so much pride and pettiness in these work families, and but I mean, I don't know how to define how Ettore Scola does this, but it makes us not view him as a racist. Well, I mean, these are all pretty white people, as a bigot. I don't see. He doesn't love these characters. I don't think he loves them. I don't think they're endearing to him. But I think that what he's saying is that this family is like us. We are this. I mean, he's holding a very exaggerated funhouse mirror to our social structures. So I guess that's how he gets away with it. He's accusing us as well.
Yeah, I think partly one of the ways he gets away with it is partly Nino Manfredi's performance, and the fact that you find the paterfamilias a sort of anti-hero, somebody who you don't necessarily want, you don't sympathize with or empathize with even, but you do. You find yourself chuckling and you find yourself laughing at his antics and the things he does. I mean, another way of looking at it would be that this is a kind of pre-modern drama. It's something more closer to something like Moliere or Chaucer, in that you're not dream sequence aside, you're not really looking at these people having sort of internal lives. You're looking at them as their pure appetite. They're doing stuff. He goes and has wine. The guy goes and sells one of the it's his son-in-law with the broken nose, goes and he's just stolen a clock. and he sells it for nowhere near as much money as he wants, and then immediately spends the money at the same place to the two old ladies who run the store on a packet of cigarettes. And it's just that, they there's no sense of I'm going to invest this money or I'm going to, they're just so hopeless. They're just immediately going for whatever they want at that moment. And, and that goes with the sex, which is probably where most people will feel uncomfortable when approaching this film, because it has several scenes of people of sex in which consent is not necessarily a given, or is certainly not as straightforward as we would like to see it these days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people just, the women will be doing their things. There's a scene where one of them is washing her hair in the sink and someone will just come up with her and have sex with her. It's like a forced consent, right? It's not really consent. It's forced, like, just be quiet, just don't complain. And then there's a scene where, yeah, the father brings his lover, the old prostitute, to his bed. And when everyone's sleeping, one of the sons just goes up to the sleeping lady and has sex with her, the sleeping lover of his father, right? It's just so messy. The sex is so messy.
Go back to sleep.
One of the points. Yeah, he's like, go back to sleep. Goes back to sleep. Exactly. But I think that the figure, I just call him father, right? Jacinto.
Yeah.
I think his figure is the only one who has some internality, because I guess he's searching for something when he finds the older prostitute. But he's the one who makes me think of the Roman Empire, because he's ruling his house like a tyrant. He has this resentment. There's a sequence in the film where he's like, look at these people, his family, right? His extended family. I've built this house like 20 years ago with my own hands, and they all live here rent free. So he has this self-serving righteousness, it's just, I don't know how Italians perceive this movie, but as an outsider, thinking about Italian history, obviously you cannot think of the Roman Empire and this rot from within that came from such an exaggerated cadre of emperors, right? I mean, each one worse than the next, and it's really hard to not think of him as a Nero figure, because he has a self-serving entitlement. He has this complete resentment for everyone. We do think of the Roman Empire as a time of sex and food, of gluttony and lust. Satyricon has a lot of that, Fellini's film. And I guess he is an agent of his own destruction, right? He is an agent of his own lifestyle. And so I think this internal rot is kind of thematically linked to an examination of the end of the Roman Empire. And not to say, if we're talking about Nero, that Jacinto ends up setting fire to his own home, right? As Nero would supposedly be indifferent to Rome catching on fire. He also has a great gag where the grandmother in her wheelchair is lassoed out of the house while it's on fire, and some of her hair is still on fire, which is lassoed out of the house. And to talk about the grandmother who's just always attached to the TV. And there's a dialogue where everyone's like plotting to since Jacinto is spending money on his lover, let's all kill him and get them. And they're planning this next to her, and she's like, "Oh no, don't kill my son. You want to kill my son? Don't kill my son." And one of the kids is like, "Well, we're gonna kill him because he's spending his money on his lover, on the prostitute." And she immediately goes, "Oh, all right, kill him then."
And she's sort of watching TV, so she's sort of also the most connected to the world. So she occasionally comes out with English as well. She's like learning English via the TV, and in some ways is kind of like the most educated person in the house. But it's this sort of semi-senile old bat. I mean, it has so many layers of this sort of craziness about it, and yet there are these. I keep coming back to how the soundtrack is beautiful, how the cinematography is really gorgeous at times, and the way it uses space and place, and also there's a kind of a Chaucer. I'm thinking of Pasolini's Chaucer as well. That sort of embracing of all life, So you do have like a male prostitute who's dressing as a transvestite, and you see him from behind. as he gets out of a car and starts walking. So you see him as a she until one of the neighbors goes, "Oh, hello," and he starts speaking, and you realize he's a fella. And there's this sort of great, like in this community, no one cares about that sort of stuff because they're all making a living as in the best way they can. So there's no judgment, there's no bourgeois sort of worries.
Oh, and the mother proudly opens a Play Lesbos magazine where her daughter has one naked photo or something like that. And he
Exactly.
shows it to the neighborhood kid, not kids, but the neighborhood teenagers. Like, so proud of it.
Yeah, and she meets her daughter outside to, how was work today, dear? And this is so, there is, as you say, I guess there is this sort of affection, and I mean, she's an example of filial love. She's an example of a mum, a maternal love of someone actually doing the opposite of Giacinto and his murderous brood.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if. What do you think of a certain Roman Empire context to this?
Yeah, you definitely have it, but I think the thing which is most prominent, I mean, you definitely have it in the sense that this looks like old Rome. So, you've got a Romulus and Remus feel to it. And you've got to remember, Romulus and Remus they're sort of killing each other and, suckled by a she-wolf. So it speaks of an animalistic beginning. But the thing which is dominating the skyline in the background is the Vatican and St. Peter's, and the Vatican City is the last papal state. So I think if I'm watching this in 1976, I'm thinking of, I mean, an Italy which is dominated by the Democristiani, the center right Catholic Church, political wing of the Catholic Church, and the morality which is entirely based on the Holy Family and the Sacred Family, and this is and I think that's. I mean, I do see the feasting and the, a sort of paganistic Roman with a capital R background to it.
But with the tyranny, right? The tyrannical.
Yeah. I mean, the authority, but that's patriarchy that goes through as well. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not. It's definitely there's definitely an element there. Yeah, I'm just wondering. I mean, I just think maybe you. How many times do you think about the Roman Empire a week?
Oh, zero probably. But what's actually funny is now that I come to think of it, I've never seen an Italian production based in the Roman Empire. Maybe you can recommend me some later. There's a
Oh,
lot of British ones. Remember the great BBC series I, Claudius, which in turn is based on the book. HBO had a series called Rome. I mean, Hollywood has Cleopatra, which I mean, she's obviously an Egyptian queen, but people who know history know that there's a lot of involvement with the Roman Empire. I don't really know any.
well, those big plepums, those big sort of sword and sandal films that were taking place post-war, a lot of them were shooting in Cinecittà. Cleopatra
No.
shot there. Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Ben-Hur
Yeah.
shot there. So there was a
Yeah, but they're
lot.
not Italian productions, right? Italian language productions, especially. How is that in Italian cinema?
You do have a series of them, and they are directed, and they're often using the sets. That's the
Hmm.
connection that I was going to make. And Sergio Leone, his first film as a feature film director was The Colossus of Rhodes, which was this kind of thing. And a lot of them would star sort of Steve Reeves and people like that, like American bodybuilders who would come
Hmm.
and I'm not sure if they would be so much portrayals of Rome as such, more like sort of classical period. So it could easily be Greece, ancient Greece, or it
Hmm.
could be any stories, sort of pre-Christian stories, really, rather than necessarily Rome. But there are definitely some Roman ones in there as in that genre. But yeah, it's a definite post-war genre. They look a bit cheaper. They're not particularly respected. It's not. It's an interesting question that because they're not as respected as the spaghetti western or the giallo or the polizeschi or definitely horror with Mario Bava. You don't have like a director who made who made it his own, who you go, yeah, he's the one to go to if you want, the way Leone has with westerns or Dario Argento has with Gialli. So that's kind of, yeah, it's kind of debased or neglected genre. So I think we've made a really good argument for people, hopefully for people who haven't seen this film to go and have a look for it. It's not the sort of film as well that I would say, okay, if you like this type of film, then you'll like this, because there really aren't that many films that are like this. Yeah, again, while I was watching it, I was only thinking of Shameless.
Yeah, I haven't seen Shameless, but the only other person I could think about when I was looking at this film was a certain American director from Baltimore, Mr. John Waters,
Right.
well, if you ever get to interview him, because he also writes books, definitely ask him if you've ever seen this film and let me know what he thinks of it. But again, John Waters has made a career out of making these kinds of films. And what's so fascinating about this one is that Ettore made just this film in the grotesque fashion. And I tried watching a John Waters, I forget which one it is, but when there's like a plate of dog shit and one of the characters is going to eat it.
Pink Flamingos.
Pink Flamingos, yeah, that was the one. That was one of the very few times where I stopped watching a film and never went back to it. It's funny. I'll take all of the awful keywords that we said in the beginning for Brutti, Sporchi, Cattivi, but the person who's going to eat dog shit, that's where I draw the line. I couldn't watch it. I'm like physically gagging.
You're not going to see 120 Days of Sodom then. You don't want to see that.
Not.
Yeah,
I don't want to see that. But yeah. So I guess people who are familiar with John Waters, I mean, this film shares a lot with that kind of aesthetic and thematic. And I've seen more of the more commercial John Waters fare, and I love him. You read an interview, or you watch an interview. He's a great figure in contemporary bad taste. But again, someone who's like a poster boy for it. Who symbolizes this kind of cinema. And Ettore never. I don't know if he ever went back to it, but it seems not. When I was reading about him preparing for it seems not. I mean. Like I said, later he'd win an Academy Award for other films.
That is interesting, the John Waters comparison. And I mean, there is another Italian film, La Grande Buffata. I think it's a European, and it has. So there were these films around which were about, let's push the boundaries of taste, and that film is really, really strange and shocking and funny and interesting. And it's all about three men who've decided to eat themselves to death. The Big Feast, or the Great Feast, I think it's called in English. But I can't really think of other than John Waters and maybe Harmony Korine. It's that idea of. It's not just bad taste, but there's something more to this film than just bad taste. There's a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, those three directors, they have things to say in their films, and I think we've talked a lot through. Hopefully, we'll serve even as a guide to convince people to watch. I mean, should people watch this film? I don't know. Like I said,
I would definitely, with the caveat that you're watching a film from the 1970s, and there's going to be some stuff in there that doesn't necessarily align with what we're culturally prepared to laugh at or to dismiss as not problematic. I mean, earlier on in this conversation, I was trying to make a case like, oh, it's domestic violence, but it's not your father's domestic violence. And it's just like, well, wait a second. Yeah. Those words do not sound good. That's not a way of talking about something which is, but at the same time, this film exists, and I think it is an important. I think there is an important sort of tradition here of Italian film that.
I mean, like I said before, I think this is a completely defensible film today because it is so heightened, because you are immersed in this alternate point of view immediately. That I think it's a lot more defensible than regular Italian comedies from this period. Only because those are set in the real world, quote unquote, and this one is set in a place you've never seen before, right? So I think I think this film, ironically, which is a lot heavier than a lot of Italian comedy, is a lot more. It can be a lot more intellectualized today, right?
Mm.
The importance of his existence is much more defensible than a regular run-of-the-mill comedy where everyone slaps the women around.
Which you can get into the mid to late 80s as well. You don't even it's not even a case of the 70s specifically. It goes even further along in time. Well, I think that's a brilliant moment for us to close a conversation. It is. I recommend it. I was really pleased that you'd suggested it, because I enjoyed it. I definitely had my WTF moments, but that's kind of good. That's kind of something that I appreciate having. That I like being shaken up like that. So, and as you say, there are certain moments, and the last shot, which we are not going to spoil, is one of those moments which I think will last with you. For some reason, it made me think of Stalker, maybe just a physical resemblance, but the Andrei Tarkovsky certainly. But it has that sort of almost like that crowning glory moment of a film where the last shot is almost explains everything or justifies everything.
Yeah, and dooms it continually, right? It's an omen. It's a signal of doom, and just it's so, yeah. To say it's a gut punch is a euphemism. We're building it up so much that it might be sort of a letdown for people who haven't seen the film. But yeah, it'll grow on you. It'll haunt you. It haunts me.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from people who've not seen the film, actually. You send me an email or send me a message. DMs are open on Twitter. If you do watch the film as a result of the podcast, and let me know what you think. Brilliant, Lino. So Lino Meireles, we're looking forward to your next film, be it a short, be it a feature.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for suggesting this film and for taking part.
Yeah. Thanks for hearing me out. Thanks for spending 2 hours in this filth with me, which is ironic because there's no other filthy or grotesque movie that I like. This is it. This was the first one. This was the original one for me. And, I don't recommend it as an introduction to I do recommend it as an introduction to the genre because it's the only one I've ever been able to watch all the way through. But yeah. And maybe people who have seen these other films, people who are fans of John Waters will watch this movie as well and have plenty to say about it.
Absolutely.
I hope this isn't one of your least heard podcast episodes just because of how brutal this film is and how unknown it might be. I don't know if it's known or unknown in Italy. But yeah, this, as I said, in over 20 years, this was my first time ever talking to someone about this movie, Brutti, Sporchi, Cattivi.
Well, this is part of the point of our podcast, is to get people to watch more films, maybe not always the same ones, not always La Dolce Vita. And the 120 Days of Sodom is probably the most listened to episode I've done in this series. So there you go.
Wow, I haven't. Well, I think I skipped it, but I'm going to listen to it now instead of watching the movie. There you go. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen to the podcast and never have to watch the film.
Hopefully you won't be gagging. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lino.
Yeah, thank you. Ciao.
Arrivederci ragazzi, ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.